This is Unit 2, Chapter 6, The American Revolution. At this time period before the Revolution, for about 150 years, the British colonies were left alone in North America. They had very little interference from England. So at this point in time, the colonies are creating their own governments, they're operating independently, they're managing their legal systems, taxes, economics. They're pretty much doing everything on their own. They don't have a identity with the British. If you look at the pictures on the left are kind of how the colonial people lived, and on the right is how the monarch is living in Britain. So instead of the colonists identifying with the British, they're more identifying themselves as Virginians, New Yorkers, Pennsylvanians, whatever colony they're from. So this is going to create a very different scenario when the British try and get control of the colonies during the Revolution. You also have different colonies are known for different religious type freedoms. So the Puritans are going to settle in Massachusetts, seeking religious freedom. The Quakers will settle in Pennsylvania. Virginia is going to be strong in economic opportunity. Maryland is going to be a Catholic refuge. And Georgia actually is a debtor's colony. So anybody who didn't pay their bills was sent from Britain to the colonies. So by 1760, in North America, the British colonies had grown to be over 2 million people. And each colony had its own type of charter, its own type of structure, and ran independently of the others, and definitely independently of the British Crown. They did still have mercantilism, which is mercantilism is where it's an economic system, and it is where the British are the mother country. So the colonies are the kids, basically, and the colonies' resources like wood. If the colonists wanted a table, they couldn't just go cut down the wood in their backyard. They would have to cut down the wood in their backyard, which belonged to the crown, ship it over the Atlantic Ocean, and then the crown, the British, would make a table and then they would sell it back to the colony. So mercantilism, the British had both the resources and they also had the economic market, whereas the colonists had no choice. All right, so throughout the 17th and 18th century, Britain and France are going to be continuously locked into all different types of imperial wars. And this is going to extend from Europe all the way into their colonial holdings in North America. So they have different conflicts. They have King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War. So these are always constantly drawing the American settlers, the colonists, into these different European wars. So at this point in 1754, one of the most consequential wars was called the French and Indian War. It's going to be the French and Indian against the British and the colonists. It's part of an overall larger war that's called the 7 Years' War, but in North America, we refer to it as the French and Indian War because that's what our theater of the war was called. So France, their position in North America had weakened due to different financial strains and repeated international wars that they were fighting with England. They're not able to maintain their traditional alliances they had with different Native American tribes. They had to offer different gifts to these different tribes, and this was a key diplomatic practice that they did. So, in order to get money, France is going to start raising rents on their forts, and they're going to begin to charge the different Native American tribes more for trade. And this is going to erode the trust and loyalty that the tribes had to the French. This inability is going to fracture these different tribal alliances, and it's going to actually diminish the French influence among these different Native American tribes. So this is happening in the Ohio River Valley. And this region is very rich in resources, and it also has a very strategic value. So all these different small refugee tribes are competing for this dominance. And so what is going to happen is the British are going to create a strong merchant and strong trade in Pennsylvania. They're going to offer different goods without any political or military strings. So this shift in alliance disrupts the balance of power between France and Britain and between the colonial interest in Pennsylvania and Virginia. So France attempts to reassert control by pressuring its Native Americans to back them. And they're going to do this. They're going to force them to ally with them through trying to force them into submission. So this is only going to create and escalate more tension between the groups. So George Washington at this time is a young officer from Virginia. He is going to go and challenge the French for their claims in this Ohio region. And in 1754, Washington's going to lead a surprise attack on the small French recon party, marking the first military engagement of what is going to become the French and Indian War. And the French and Indian War is very important because it leads to this war debt that the British want to collect, and it also leads to the colonists just being tired of being drawn into these different wars. It's also going to lead to the French Revolution. All right, so the war has pitted the British and the colonial forces against the French and the Indians, is what they call it in this title. So it's this brutal, widespread war. And the different Native American groups are threatening the colonial frontiers, kind of where the colonies are set up. And so England is stepping in to defend its settlements. The conflict will officially end with the Treaty of Paris on February 10th, 1763. France will have to cede all of its North American territories west of the Mississippi to Britain. And that's going to effectively end France's presence in colonial America. But the victory is going to come with a huge cost. Britain's going to have this incredible war debt from coming over and fighting to protect, in their opinion, to protect the colonists and to protect their investment. So the British believe that the colonists should help pay. They came over to defend the colonies and help the colonists, and they should help pay for this huge war debt. The colonists are going to feel quite different. They do not want to pay for the French and Indian War. They don't want to help pay that war debt. They believe that the crown should protect them just because it's the crown's colony. So they're going to refuse to pay. And what the crown, the British crown, is going to do, the monarchy, is they're going to start by taxation. That's how you get money in the government. So one of the first things that they're going to do is they're going to deal with Pontiac's rebellion in 1763. This is a tribe in that Ohio Valley, and they feel rejected by the British rule and by settlers continuing to encroach on their territory. So they're going to fight back by seizing forts and attacking frontier settlements, which are colonies, but it's like the homes kind of outside on all the land, like the farms and stuff. So the British, ruling by force, they're going to try and maintain peace, okay, because these are their new allies because they've left the French. So they're going to do two things: to maintain peace with the Indians and to stop the colonists from moving out of their reach, moving further west, they're going to create what's called the Proclamation of 1763. The Proclamation of 1763 is that red line that you see on the map. It's actually the Appalachian Mountains. And this is set to stabilize the relationships between the Indians, to have better relationships with the Indians, and also to keep the colonists from going too far west. This way they're kept by the Atlantic Ocean. They've got the Atlantic Ocean on one side, the right-hand side, and they've got the Appalachian Mountains on the left-hand side. So what is happening is that the Crown is realizing that they've left the colonists alone for way too, they left them alone for way too long, and they're really out of control. So it's kind of like a toddler that you put in a playpen. You want to keep them more contained so that you can regain the control over them. So you've got the colonists who are going to be upset. You've got years of these imperial rivalries between the British and the French. They can't stand each other. So you have all of this, like I said, flowing over into the colonies. The colonists are sick and tired of being drawn into all these different global wars that they have nothing to do with. They're wanting all of that to end. And then you have the British, who again are wanting to get the colonists back under control. And they're going to want them to help pay taxes. They're going to want them to be back under the British rule and listen to what the Crown is telling them. Whereas the colonists are going to blame the British for the war. It's their debt. They're going to blame them for the loss of liberty, for starting to tax them. And these mountain tensions are going to eventually lead to the actual revolution. Okay, so this is just going back over the Proclamation of 1763, which we've already have talked about. All right, so the Crown is going to start through taxation. Taxation is how the United States government collects money to pay for the government. It's how a lot of governments collect money. So it's not that unusual to be done. So in 1764, Britain's going to introduce a series of taxes. And the taxes are aimed at regaining control over the colonies and also collecting money to pay off this war debt from the French and Indian War. So the first one is the Sugar Act. This is going to actually reduce the tax on molasses from 6 to 3%, 3 pence, sorry. They did have a tax. They were supposed to be paying 6 pence for their molasses, and their molasses is what they use for their rum, but they weren't even paying that. So after the war, the Crown is like, okay, maybe we'll try 3 pence. Maybe they'll pay that. So they're hoping that by lowering the tax, maybe the colonists will become compliant and they can also generate a revenue. So they also restrict the colonists from trade and smuggling and cutting into any type of profits and tightening the British control. So the same year is going to be the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act of 1765 is extremely important. The Stamp Act, this is a stamp or a seal like you would have on your birth certificate, or when you graduate high school, it'll be in a sealed envelope and you will have a stamp saying, hey, this is a certified copy that this person graduated. It makes whatever document legal. So remember, the colonists had been taking care of business for 150 years. They had had marriages, death certificates, all different types of legal documents, commerce documents, all different types of documents for 150 years. They have placed their own stamp on it saying that this is legal, this is legit. Well, now the Stamp Act of 1765 is saying, no more. None of that stuff is legal unless it now carries this British stamp that we are telling you that you have to now put on. So this is going to be a huge, huge issue with the colonies. And this is going to affect your wealthier people. This is going to affect your lawyers, your doctors, your merchants who are dealing with different trade type documents. So this is going to be a big issue. And they also want the stamps on newspapers, which is how they receive their news, and different cards and dice, which is how, which was, a huge part of their entertainment. So this tax is going to really spark outrage, and they're going to get quite mad. So what's going to happen is the Parliament, which is the Congress in Britain, they're going to send their Prime Minister Charles Townshend in 1769. And what he's going to do is he is going to then create the Townshend Acts. And all that is just putting a whole bunch of other taxes, all together in one little pretty package. And he's going to now tax paint, paper, lead, glass, and tea. And these are all going to be taxed on top of the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act. So pretty much everything is going to start being taxed. The other thing that the Townshend Acts had was called the Quartering Act. And what the Quartering Act was is it forced the colonists to allow British soldiers to stay and live in their houses. So what's going on is, as the British Crown sees that the colonists are, rejecting these taxes and starting to act up and they're out of control, the British Crown is going to send more and more soldiers to North America to get everybody back in control. So the Quartering Act means that if you have your home, your house, you have to then house the British soldiers that they are sending. And it's not like you would put them in your spare room if you had a spare room, or you would let them sleep by the fire. No, they took the main bedrooms, they took control of the house, and you slept wherever you could sleep if you were able to sleep inside. The next thing is called the rights of assistance, which is basically your search warrant. So this allowed the British officers, to search any colonial home without reason. They could search whoever they wanted to search, and this is going to be an issue because the colonists are presently smuggling a lot of goods that they can't get because of the taxation. All right, so there's a huge tension, obviously, between the British troops and the American colonists. They're all reaching a boiling point, and on March 5th, 1770, this kind of comes to an end, to a halt. And this is with the Boston Massacre. Now, we see Boston Massacre, and you think it's a whole lot of people who get killed, but it's really only 5 civilians that got killed. And so what's going to happen is there's going to be an angry crowd, and they're going to confront some of the British soldiers that are stationed in Boston, and they're going to holler back and forth, and this is going to escalate into a shouting match. Somebody, apparently, what they assume happened, somebody is going to send a snowball flying, and it's going to hit one of the soldiers, and then one of the soldiers is going to open fire, and they're going to end up killing 5 civilians. This is used as propaganda. The Patriots, who are the colonists, are going to use this as powerful propaganda, trying to fuel the anti-British sentiment. So they're going to say, they're going to use the words massacre because that sounds a lot worse. And they're going to use this as a propaganda piece. Then you have John Adams, and John Adams was a very prominent person at this time. He's a lawyer, and he's actually going to defend the soldiers in court, and he's going to get an acquittal for 6 of them, arguing that they had actually acted in self-defense. And then that's going to create a lot of tension in the aftermath, and eventually the British will withdraw from Boston to try and ease the tensions. and try and de-escalate any other growing retaliation. Okay, the Boston Tea Party. I know you guys have heard of the Boston Tea Party. So this happens on the night of December 16, 1773. The Sons of Liberty, which were a radicalized group that would be very heavy into protest. So they're going to dress up like some Native Americans, and they're going to go to the Boston Harbor, and they're going to board 3 ships. Now they're protesting this taxation on tea. And this tea is not like tea bags that you can get 100 for $5. This is very expensive tea, like tea leaves. So what they're going to do is they're going to disguise themselves as Mohawk Indians. They're going to dump 342 chests of East Indian Company tea into the water. This today, in today's money, would be worth millions. So it was an act to protest the tea, but what it actually does is it's going to destroy the bay, the Boston Harbor. It's going to have this huge environmental impact. This was where they got their fish, the marine life. So there was a huge trade in fishing, and all of that is going to be destroyed when the tea goes into the water. It destroys the ecosystem. So they have the lack of that. They have to shut down the harbor. So not only are they losing massive amounts of money by the fishing and the other marine life that they got out of the harbor, they also are going to be forced to repay the British Indian, the East Indian, was it the East Indian? I can't remember now. Yeah, the East Indian Company back for the tea that they destroyed. So after this happens, the British government is going to pass what the colonists will nickname the Intolerable Acts. And it includes closing the harbor, we already talked about that, until the tea is repaid, until the harbor can adjust from the damage. And it's really going to cripple the local economy. But this is going to, for the colonists and their rebellion, it's going to bring them closer to a revolution, and it's also going to unite them. Okay, so then we have the First Continental Congress. This is going to be a response to the Intolerable Acts that were passed by the British in response to the Boston Tea Party. So, like we talked about before, the acts are going to close down the Boston Harbor. They're going to revoke the colony's charter, which is a huge thing. The charter had all your rules and made you like a legit colony. And they're going to expand the Quartern Act. So this will allow the British officials to even use more homes and take over more territory. So these measures are considered quite harsh to the colonists. And so it alarms them. And the 13 colonies, not just Massachusetts, they all come together and they each send a delegate to Philadelphia in September of 1774 to discuss this. All the colonies do. And this is going to be known as the First Continental Congress. And this also marks the first time that they're going to unify as colonies. They were all separate before, but now they're going to unify as one and respond to what they feel is the British oppression. So the delegates organize a boycott of British goods. They draft the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, and they begin preparing for possible military action. The Congress, this is a turning point. It showed that the colonies were ready to stand together and resist British control. It's going to lay the foundation for the Revolutionary War. And it's the first time, that, like I said, that they're all meeting together. So this is a very significant achievement. All right, so between 1763 and 1765, you have the colonies resisting the British imperial legislations. They're going to start to demand the rights of the Englishmen. So if they are taxed, if the British wants to tax them, then they also need to be treated like the British, like the Englishmen under the British Constitution. So the colonists insist that they were entitled to liberty, representation, and self-governance, while the British maintained that the Parliament had the authority to govern the entire empire for the benefit of the whole. So as Parliament passes new laws like the Stamp Act, the colonies start to respond with organized protest, both in the streets and through legislation. By November of 1765, every colony except for Georgia had taken steps to block the different tax enforcement. The Sons of Liberty, like I said before, are kind of a radical group. They were very vocal in their opposition. In October, delegates from the 9 colonies, they're going to meet in New York for the Stamp Act Congress, where they're going to ratify 14 resolutions challenging the act on constitutional grounds, bringing the colonies closer to a unified resistance. So the British, they're deeply proud of their government, their parliament. They see their constitution and the way they run things as the ultimate institution of self-government. The political system that they have has evolved over centuries of struggles, beginning with the Magna Carta in 1215, which is going to limit the king's power and empower more of the nobles and the other classes. Later, during the Glorious Revolution of 1688, they're going to expand liberties, establishing that the monarch must be ruled with consent of the governed, the people. To the British, liberty was not an individual defiance, but a collective right held by the people to restrain rulers. They believed Parliament represented this balance and had the authority to govern an entire empire, which includes the colonies, for the good of all. So for the good of the entire empire, the colonies needed to submit to what the British were saying. This belief is going to clash with the colonial views of self-rule, and it's going to also grow this division between the British and the colonists. In January of 1776, Thomas Paine is going to publish a pamphlet called Common Sense. This is kind of what we call the eve of the revolution. It's going to make a very persuasive case for America's independence. Paine is going to argue on a few things. He's going to argue that it's unnatural for such a large continent like America to be ruled by a small, distant island and also a monarchy. He's going to declare that no person should be subject to the rule of a king, especially one who governed without the consent of the people, being that they do not have the consent of the American people to govern. So this is going to really reach thousands of colonists, and it's going to kind of be the last thing that pushes them towards revolution. So Paine doesn't just call for separation from Britain, he calls for a whole new government for America. So as tensions begin to rise between the colonies and intensify in 1774 and 1775, the British government refuses to make any concessions with the colonies. They see the colonies as being radical and completely out of control. General Thomas Gage, the royal governor of Massachusetts, is ordered to seize colonial military supplies that are stored in Concord. And on April 18th of 1775, Paul Revere and William Dawes are going to ride through the night to warn the Patriot leaders that the British are advancing. At Lexington, the British troops are going to confront colonial militias. They're going to have shots fired, and though both sides claim the other one fired first, the conflict is going to escalate into Concord, where the British soldiers set fire to the Liberty Pole and flames spread to the courthouse. So fighting is going to break out, and the British were forced to retreat. In response, colonial militias are going to march to Boston, and they're going to evict Gage and his troops. They're going to fortify Bunker Hill in Charleston. And on June 17th, Gage is going to retaliate by sending 2,400 soldiers to seize the position. So, though the British technically won, they suffered a very heavy loss in casualties. And this is going to just create a stronger, more united resistance within the colonies. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, the Second Continental Congress is meeting in Philadelphia, and they're formally transferring their alliances from the British Crown to the Congress and creating a Continental Army under George Washington. They're still hoping to avoid a full-scale war, but the Congress did authorize an invasion of Canada to pressure Britain into negotiations, but that campaign is going to end in disaster. They're still trying to seek peace, so Congress sends what they call the Olive Branch Petition to King George III. And on August 23, 1775, the king declares the colonies an open rebellion. So the Congress, although they had tried to avoid war and they have not yet declared war or independence, the American Revolution has basically begun. In 1776, the conflict will intensify. Congress still held out for hope for a peaceful resolution with Britain. However, King George III and Parliament made coming back together nearly impossible. They're going to cut off all of America's commerce. They're going to authorize the British Navy to seize colonial ships and cargo. And once they seize a ship, they can do what's called pressing, and that is putting those soldiers, those Americans, who are actually, they're not soldiers, the American seamen who are on the ships, they can force them to be British soldiers. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to hire German mercenaries, and they're going to be known as Heisens, and they're going to fight alongside the British against the colonies. In Virginia, the royal governor, Lord Dunmore, offered freedom to enslaved people who joined the British cause, further inflaming tensions between the colonists and the British. So these aggressive acts, combined with the powerful influence of Thomas Paine's pamphlet of Common Sense, it's going to shift the public opinion, and it's going to push Congress towards declaring independence, which is the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, but it's influenced by John Locke's Enlightenment ideas and John Locke's social contract theory. So it asserts that all people are created equal and born with fundamental rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And it discusses that a government's existence is to protect the rights of the governed, the rights of the people. The power comes from the people. And if a government is not protecting the rights of the people therefore have the right to rebel against it. And that is going to be what the colonists are going to justify for the revolution. Now, as the revolution starts, you have the patriots who are your colonists. They're going to have different disadvantages. They do not have a lot of money. They're poorly organized. They're largely untrained as a military unit. They have few cannons, limited gunpowder, and no navy. So that is going to be an issue for the patriots. Whereas the British, their disadvantage is that they've traveled 3,000 miles to get here. Supplies are in different areas. They're not all, arriving in America when they need for them to arrive. And they're also going to be under constant attack from the colonists. Now, at this time, the British, the way that they fought was, we're going to have a battle at 2 o'clock on this field. Everybody go, everybody be there, and then they would line up, and the first group would walk out. When they got shot, they would line up again, and the second group would go, and then the third group. And that was kind of how you battled. So they're not worried as they're marching to the battle, because that's where the war starts, when you get to the battleground. Well, the colonists, what they're going to do and how they win, because there's more British than there are colonists, is that they're going to hunt. They know the ground, they know the soil, this is their territory. They're used to hunting. They're going to, as the British are moving to these different battles, that's where they're going to go and attack the British and sabotage them. So it's really these militias and these small armies that are tricking the British and messing up their maneuvers and taking them out when they are not used to fighting that way. They're used to wait until you get to the battle to fight. So the American Revolution is going to bring, of course, a huge upheaval. You're going to have death, inflation, profiteering, economic depression. You have radicals, moderates that are united for victory, but then they're going to have very different ideas on how the country should be run. You're going to have who is a citizen, who is not a citizen, are women citizens? Do we still have slavery if we're founded on liberty? If everybody, who does the idea that everybody born has natural rights? So all of this is going to start to become an issue as they move forward. They're also going to have the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This is going to establish a way to govern the Northwest Territory. And how they're going to admit new states and what they're going to admit these states on to start building from the original 13. You also have about 15 to 20% of the white population, roughly 500,000 people, who are still loyal to the British Crown. Most of these loyalists left the newly formed United States, and the United States is going to form as soon as the revolution is done. For Canada, some left for Great Britain, and some went to the West Indies. Their departures were not marked by widespread trials, executions, or mobs, or violence. You know, they were living amongst they were all colonists at one time. Many of these exiles are going to come from the upper tiers of society, because the people who held titles are going to want to keep those titles, so they're going to move where those titles are still good. The war is going to have a devastating impact on the economy. It's going to mess up production and trade. And also you have the cost of the war itself, which you're going to have to tax your people to create. At this time, Congress has no authority to directly tax the people, which is going to be an issue. They're going to print money, but it's not going to have a sufficient backing, and that's going to cause inflation and a sharp decline of the currency's value. So as they are trying to create this new republic, they're going to have all different types of challenges moving forward. Okay, so we have that it's going to end. The American Revolution ends with the Treaty of Paris, September 3rd, 1783. We're going to become the United States. This births a new nation. And after years of conflict, you have very pivotal battles at Saratoga and Yorktown. Britain will officially recognize America as being independent.